That discussion of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi happened because reporters asked about it, which of course is what reporters needed to do in that situation. It was very, I think, present in the room, the fact that this is someone, the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia, who only a few years ago was largely considered an international pariah because of that murder, and because of what U.S. intelligence said about the murder, which was that he was aware of it and likely approved it.
The senators unanimously agreed to pass legislation forcing the Justice Department to release its files related to Jeffrey Epstein. It's been sent to the desk of President Trump, who after months of trying to kill the bill now says the Republicans have got nothing to hide. And Trump has been busy rolling out the red carpet for Saudi Arabia's leader, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, whose extraordinary admission that the killing of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi was a mistake was smoothed over even further by Trump, who described Khashoggi as someone who a lot of people didn't like and told the press pack off. You don't have to embarrass our guest by asking a question like that, he said. Well, let's talk to a man in the room, Jeff Mason, White House Correspondent for Reuters. A very good afternoon from us in London, Jeff. Let's start with the release of these files. How soon could that happen? And why does there have to be legislation in place for these files to see the light of day?
Well, the answer to your second question is there doesn't have to be legislation in place. In fact, the president could direct the Department of Justice to release those files right now if he wanted to. And that is just something that he hasn't wanted to do. And as you rightly said in your introduction, the president broadly has been opposed to getting this information out in the first place until he realized in the last several days that the Congress was going to go on and do this without him. So he ended up changing his position and encouraging Republicans in the House to vote for the release of the files, and that was one thing that led to the massive majority or the massively large vote in favor of doing so in the House this week.
Trump said that he was going to release the files as part of his election campaign. We have seen him flip-flop on that. And now, today, he's saying, yes, absolutely, go for it. But does that mean that there might still be time for him to change his mind again?
I mean, he could theoretically decide to veto this legislation, but that's not what he says he's going to do. I think the sort of a similar question or a similar outcome to this will be, even with his signature on the legislation, how does the Department of Justice, which has these files, respond? Do they take a long time to do it? Do they take a long time to go through and redact information? What sort of criteria do they use for the redactions? What do they decide is classified or not classified? So there are still many questions that are up in the air about what happens, even with this legislation now passed and likely to be signed by President Trump once it hits his desk.
What do you think we're going to find out?
You know what? I'm a journalist. It's not my job to speculate, but I do think that as somebody who's been covering this story, that there's so much speculation about it. Regardless of what is in there, there's going to be a really, really high level of interest. And I also think it's important to note that one of the reasons that speculation is high is because President Trump, as a presidential candidate, and the people around him before coming into office really hyped up the Epstein files and created the impression among his supporters that there was something there to hide and that they were going to be the ones to release it. So that's at least one reason why his own supporters have largely driven this train. They expected these files to be released. Then the Trump administration did not release them. Clearly, Democrats also were on that train and saw a political vulnerability for the president and wanted to exploit it. But it was also very much the disappointment by his own supporters and by his base that led to this moment occurring right now.
We talk so much about the political effect of the Epstein files at the moment, don't we, Jeff? And actually there was a huge gathering of women, many of whom who were the girls on the planes, on the island, in the mansions. They want to see more prosecutions. They want to see justice. Do you think that that comes closer because of what's about to be released? Or let's be honest about this, if more damaging revelations are released about incredibly powerful, very rich men, is it just more anguish for them?
These are all good questions, and many of them are questions that I just simply can't answer. But what I can say is the Department of Justice earlier this year, based on what it had in the files, said that there was nothing more that it needed or could prosecute. That has changed a little bit in the last few weeks because President Trump directed the Department of Justice to investigate ties between Jeffrey Epstein and prominent Democrats, which is pretty in line with his broad desire to go after political or perceived political foes. But I say all of that now in part to just prepare people for the possibility that once these files come out, there may be things in there that are very interesting or damning, but it is a cadre or a pile of material that lawyers have already looked through and determined that no more prosecutions were warranted.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for all of that. Let's turn our attention to other things that have been happening in and around the White House. President Trump has been hosting MBS, the ruler of Saudi Arabia. It was an extraordinary press conference, Jeff, wasn't it, in terms of its chumminess, its sucky-uppiness, the discussion openly of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. What did you make of it all?
That discussion of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi happened because reporters asked about it, which of course is what reporters needed to do in that situation. It was very, I think, present in the room, the fact that this is someone, the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia, who only a few years ago was largely considered an international pariah because of that murder, and because of what U.S. intelligence said about the murder, which was that he was aware of it and likely approved it. So there was a huge kind of turnaround in his position internationally to be invited to the sanctum of the Oval Office, and the body language between President Trump and the man many people call MBS was very positive and chummy, as you said, and reflected how important certainly this president sees the relationship with Saudi Arabia, enough to dismiss even the U.S. intelligence version of what happened to Mr. Khashoggi several years ago.
MBS also said he felt bad about the pain that families affected by 9/11 had felt. And I wonder, Jeff, how that goes down in America all these years later.
Well, 9/11 families are still a very powerful political force in the United States, and they've been pressuring multiple administrations, Democratic and Republican, to do more about Saudi Arabia and its role. And I think the fact that he acknowledged that is something that reflects that he's aware of the politics in the United States. He's very aware of that and of, I think, multiple things with regard to politics in the United States. He's clearly a good student of U.S. politics. But I think it's also a reflection, again, to your initial question of the fact that this is still very raw for American families who were touched by 9/11.
Yeah. Can we just talk a tiny bit about the relationship between the press and Trump at the moment as well, Jeff? Donald Trump tried to belittle the reporter from ABC who asked that specific question about Jamal Khashoggi, calling her one of the worst in the business, dismissing ABC as fake news. And it isn't the only time that Trump has cut down a female journalist this week. Let's listen to this.
Jeffrey Epstein and I had a very bad relationship for many years. But he also saw strength because I was president. So he dictated a couple of memos to himself. Give me a break. You got to find out what did he know with respect to Bill Clinton, with respect to the head of Harvard, with respect to all of those people that he knew, including J.P. Morgan Chase.
Sir,
yeah, Jennifer, go ahead. Go ahead.
In the file,
Quiet, Piggy.
Well, that is Donald Trump at the end saying, quiet, piggy, to a female journalist who was asking a subsequent question. Jeff, what does the press pack make of all of this, these barbed arrows and put-downs that are aimed directly at you?
Oh, I'm going to be nuanced in how I answer that question. There was a time when I was the president of the White House Correspondents Association during President Trump's first term where I had the job of speaking for the press corps, but I don't wear that hat anymore, and so I can't speak for the rest of my colleagues. What I can say is both of the reporters that you are referencing are terrific, and both of them were asking very important questions, questions that related to the news of the day and that related to their jobs as White House correspondents. And I certainly support that. I've been in situations where he has gone after me for the questions that I ask, and it is something that is kind of part of the job now of covering the White House is to be prepared for that. But it is our job to ask tough questions, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Sure. I just find the actual phrase "quiet piggy" just so offensive. Jeff, I mean, I don't think he would have said that to you as a male reporter. So, I mean, it's really horrible, isn't it?
I understand the question. I'm not going to be drawn into sharing an opinion other than to say that the reporters who ask those questions are terrific, and they ask questions that needed to be asked.
Yeah. For sure. Good to talk to you, Jeff. Thank you very much indeed. Jeff Mason is White House correspondent for Reuters. And it's a difficult place to be at the moment, Jane, isn't it? Because also, I think, as we heard there from Jeff, it's maybe become difficult as a member of the press to talk about the way that other members of the press are being treated. Because
he really felt uncomfortable.
You don't want it to come back on you. Yeah. And things will come back on individual reporters under that administration at the moment. That is what we see happening all the time.
We've just heard it. We've just heard a man just, perhaps I'm going to say, frightened?
Not want to get involved.
Yeah.
And
that is the world we currently live in.
It is. How would you feel if someone in response to a question, a valid question that you were asking, that would have been asked by anybody on that plane, if someone turned around to you and said, "Quiet piggy"?
Well, I mean, we've both interviewed celebrities, authors, politicians of all stripes over many hundreds of years now. And no one has ever, I'm sure, and certainly never spoken to me like that. It is unthinkable in Britain that, particularly that a politician, and heaven forfend that an elected Prime Minister, for example, of this country.
Imagine if Keir Starmer,
oh my goodness,
turned round to Beth Rigby and said, "Quiet piggy," or to anybody on a plane.
America has set itself a new low standard, and I just feel just very sad about it all. I really, really do. Couldn't happen here, wouldn't happen here.
No, and we're lucky to be this side of the pond. We should make the most of the fact that we still can ask questions very openly and expect an answer that doesn't automatically cut us off at the knees because that person just simply doesn't want to answer.
Yeah. We will be upsetting people who think we're anti-Trump. Well spotted, by the way. We don't like Donald Trump. I think that's all right. It's an entirely legitimate position, and I've always felt that 20 years from now we'll have the last laugh.